This episode today is, well, mostly about speaker placement. It's also about room acoustics and making your system sound as good as it can be. That's what I'm shooting for today, right? But speaker placement is the basis of this whole idea. Now, I've talked about it before, and I've talked about getting your speakers way out into the room, and I'm going to touch on that, but that's not the main point for today's show, even though that is one of the absolutes, is to get your speakers as far out into the room as possible. Most of the time. I'm not saying it's true for all speakers. I'm saying it's generally true. But that's not what I'm shooting for today. And by the way, yes, there will be an Audiophiliac viewer system of the day later on in this episode. Now, but today it's about speaker placement and your position relative to the speaker placement. That's what we're going to be doing. But before I get to that, I just want to ask you a question. I want you to think about this. If you've ever had the luxury of going to a concert and being able to move from one seat to the next, you're way in the front, and then you're way over there, and then you're up there, and you've got the chance to hear this band or this orchestra from many different vantage points in that room. And if you've ever done that, you know how wildly different that music can sound. The sound quality of live music, yes, even live music can sound really bad or really good, depending on where you are relative to the band or the orchestra. And that's true at home. But the space is much smaller at home, and the space at home, unlike the concert hall, isn't designed for sound reproduction in mind by the architects, right? No, your room is what it is, and you just got to deal with it the best you can. And of course, there are domestic considerations too, that you can't just put the speakers and your listening spot anywhere you want. You're living with other people, you have to keep harmony in the household, right? So there's a lot of complications to this relationship of how we get this thing done. So I understand not everything is possible. But the first part that I'm going to talk about is relatively simple and straightforward. And I'm bringing it up because I'm increasingly aware that most people's systems, they have their speakers either too close together or too far apart. And neither scenario is good. You're missing out on a lot of the sound quality of your speakers in your system by having them too narrow or too wide. That's it. What is the ideal distance between the left and the right speaker? Well, generally speaking, but not always, you want the speakers to be the same distance from left to right than you are from the speakers. So in other words, if the speakers are center to center, 8 feet apart, the ideal listening distance would be 8 feet away. But it isn't just this symmetry question isn't just about imaging. If your speakers are closer together than you are away from them, there's going to be some weird, if they make any bass at all, there's going to be some weird stuff going on in the bass, especially in the mid bass as they get closer together. And if you're too far apart, there may be some suck out in the bass. So there's a tonal price to pay if your speakers aren't ideally positioned left-right in their distance from each other. So that's why this is so important. And by the way, it's a tweak that's free, right? It just takes a laser or even a tape measure to get you in the ballpark to see what you're missing. Because yeah, if you put in a lot of work, a lot of sweat equity, you're putting your speakers in the place they are right now, but you haven't done this part, the distance from left to right, chances are you are missing out. So, mark the spot on the floor of the rug where they are now with tape or something so you can go back to that position and then try experimenting with this distance from left to right, or right to left, right? And see what happens. Please don't misunderstand my intentions here in terms of this equilateral triangle idea. I'm not saying that's the end point, that once you get it dialed in an exact equilateral triangle, that's it. No, I'm saying that's where you start and then experiment from there. So let's say you started with the speakers 8 feet apart, center to center, and you were exactly 8 feet away from the left and right speakers. Great. Then you try the speakers 8.5 feet apart and you stay 8 feet away. That might sound better. Or maybe they stay 8 feet apart and you're 9 feet away. That might be better. But you start with the equilateral triangle idea and then take it from there. Now, one of the things is, as the speakers get further apart from each other, let's say you're 8 feet away and now they're 9 feet apart, less likely to work, but it might. Some people would say, yeah, but then there's a hole in the center that you're losing center focus. And sure, that might be part of it. And then you'll have to adjust accordingly, getting the left and right speakers closer to each other again. But sometimes you can fix that with toe-in. In other words, the chances are the speakers won't sound their best when they're parallel to the wall behind them. Sometimes you'll need to angle them in towards the listening position. You do that a little bit at a time. Because sometimes when they're right on you, focused right on you, it can be too bright, too hard, and it depends on the kind of speaker it is. Like with Klipschorns or any horn speaker, if you have them firing directly at your ears, that can be a bit intense, unless you want that kind of intensity, you know. So you have to sort of season to taste. But toe-in definitely affects stereo imaging, focus, but also the tonal balance, that generally the more toed in they are, the brighter the speaker is. And of course, if you find a speaker that's too bright, your speakers are too bright, as you toe them out so they're firing closer to straight ahead, you may be able to tame a bright speaker. Now, bear in mind, I do this all the time. Every time I review a speaker, I kind of know the starting point for a given type of speaker, where it's going to sit on my floor, because it's worked before. But in the end, even I, the audiophiliac, have to mess around, experiment a little closer, a little further, a little toe in, a little less toe in. It is something that you just have to try. So no matter how experienced you are, you have to put in that time, you know. It just works that way. I wish it was a faster way. Of course, some people use speaker setup apps on their phones or computers, and if that works for you, sure, do it. And some people say you gotta like load up the room with room treatment. Sure, it's gonna take a lot of room treatment to fix big problems, and it might be ugly, and it might be expensive, but if you wanna go that way, sure, go that way. Or using a room correction system like Dirac, or what's that other one, Audiophiliac. Yeah, but they're not usually, they're usually more for bass problems in the room, like, you know, too much boom or too much thickening or too little bass. Yeah, room correction can sometimes help with that. But first, the first order of business should be to place the speakers optimally within your room. So it has nothing to do with treatment, nothing to do with room correction or any of those things. First, it comes down to put them in the right spot in your room. I mean, you know, if you play guitar, or you know somebody that plays acoustic guitar and sings, and you put them up against the wall and have them perform, it's not going to sound that good. You have to put them in the best part of the room to get the guitar to sound great and their voice to sound great. So it's not just an audio issue that it's the speakers, it's the liabilities of speaker design. It's not advanced enough to make it sound great in your space. No, it's the room, and the speaker's placement in the room. And yeah, getting them out into the room, definitely worth trying, just as an experiment. So right now, and this part I have said many times before, right now you get your speakers 6 inches away from the wall behind them, just as an experiment. Just try it. Just pull them 2 feet away into the room, just to see what that does. Chances are you're going to be really surprised and really happy with the difference. Now, you may not be able to live with them that far out into the room, but maybe you can move them in and out when you're listening and then push them back when you're not listening. That's a workaround strategy, you know. And by the way, if you think they sound good 2 feet into the room, try them 4 feet into the room, and just to see what happens. Now, of course, the bass response will change as you move them out into the room, and generally they'll have less bass, less mid-bass as you move them out into the room. That's true. Everything's changing. Everything affects everything else. But this is for you. This is for you learning the sound of your room. So another thing you could try, while you're in this experimental mode, if you have access to test tones on, let's say, a test CD or something on your phone where you could do a sweep of your room, you'll hear where there's bass resonances in your room and where there's bass nulls in your room. The nulls are where the bass will almost completely disappear. It's really kind of amazing. It could be a range of 20 dB between the loudest and the lowest. It's not subtle. But anyway, you do this sweep of your room, and then You tune it to a frequency, let's say 62 hertz, and then walk around the room. And you will be amazed how much it changes. Just even 2 feet to the left or 2 feet to the right, how much the bass level will change. It's the exact same level. It's just you're hearing nulls and peaks in your room. So it's an educational exercise. So there's always that. Here's the scary truth about room acoustics. Architects do not design homes for great acoustics. They just don't. I mean, most rooms are rectangular, more or less. Not a great shape, lots of hard surfaces. It's not ideal. So you have to work with what you have. Now, of course, there's always domestic considerations. You can't put the speakers necessarily where they're going to sound their best for all sorts of reasons, and I get it. But this is about doing what you can to make them sound as good as they can, understanding that you're going to have to make some compromises along the way. And that's the way it goes. I understand, absolutely. Now, when I was younger, I used to fantasize, boy, if I had a really big room and I could get way back from the speakers and I could just fill a space, it would be more, like a concert hall. Actually, sitting far away from speakers most of the time, there's always exceptions to these things, but if you're sitting 15 feet, 18 feet away from your box speakers, conventional direct radiating box speakers, you're hearing a lot of reverberation mixed in with the direct sound of the speaker. And if you got closer to the speaker, you would hear a lower proportion of reverberation and more direct sound, which will usually sound better, right? So being in a big room, you gotta work with what you have. But generally speaking, in a big room, if you get closer to the speakers, if that's domestically possible, they're gonna sound better. I mean, I recently saw a comment on Facebook from someone who owned Magnapans, and they moved their Magnapans 8 feet out into the room. They were 8 feet away from the wall behind them. And they said when they did that, this must have been a really big room, they just completely disappeared because you were hearing the direct sound from the speaker and less of those early reflections. And even the floor, in a Magnapan, it's radiating sound directly ahead. There's not a lot of vertical dispersion, so you're not hearing as much reflections off the floor and reflections off the ceiling with a Magnapan. So as you get away, it can be really incredible. So, or with any dipole speaker, or open baffle speaker for that matter. You get it out into the room, it's going to usually sound better and better. So there's always that to consider. Now, of course, corners are the worst places to put a speaker, but again, you got to do what you got to do. But again, it's not the speaker's fault, it's the corner's fault. If you had someone sitting and playing an acoustic guitar and sat them in a corner, it's going to sound kind of small, and if you pull that person playing the guitar out into the room, it's going to get better and better. So it's not a problem that speakers have created. No, it's a problem of room acoustics. That's the problem. Right? So yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but we got to do the best we can. And it's not about getting to perfect, it's about getting to better. And the suggestions that I made today, that is getting your speakers close to an equilateral triangle distance between left and right and you, is a great starting point, if not ending point. Now with that I can say, oh yeah, of course, I'm sorry, I was about to do the end. No, it is now time for the Audiophiliac viewer system of the day. Hey, this one comes to us from Brandon. He lives in San Mateo, California. A couple of years ago, he sold all of his digital gear and all of his surround gear and went back to vinyl. And he says he couldn't be happier. He reconnected with his music in a much deeper way than digital has ever allowed. The speakers are Klipsch Forte 3, power amp, Schiit E-Gear, and the preamp is a Schiit Freya Plus. Turntable, Technics SL 1500C with a Nagaoka MP200 cartridge, and the phono preamp is an iFi Zen Phono. Nice going, Brandon. Thank you so much. Okay, we are back. My name is Steve Guttenberg, and I am the Audiophiliac, and I am the genuine article. You are looking at him, Audiophiliac. But beware that there's imposters out there who are pretending to be me, scamming my viewers out of money, saying that I'm going to send you something I reviewed. You just have to pay for shipping. That is total BS. Don't do that. I never ask for money, except when I'm asking you to join my Patreon. To do so is super easy. The address is on the screen right now. You can join and make payments in dollars, pounds, or euros. My top patrons that pay me $50 a month, those people have a conversation with me monthly, and I've learned so much from these conversations we have. Talk about their system, they talk about ideas. It's just fantastic because it's so great, so rewarding to get to know who's out there behind this camera lens. Who am I talking to? And now I kind of know because I've talked to so many of you over the years. Anyway, with that I can say, yes, my work here is at last complete. Thank you so much for watching, and I really, really do hope to see you back here again very, very soon. Bye-bye.